Cool. Welcome to an Inference extension meeting on January 23rd of 25. Just as a reminder, this is being recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so please behave accordingly, and we are following the CNCF guidelines. Sweet. With that out of the way, let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll just do a window. Second. There we go. Cool. So just real quick, this should take hopefully no time, but we just moved around some of the maintainers. We gave our active contributors admin privileges. So we were thinking about opening up the discussions tab on GitHub, so we didn't need to use issues for every conversation. I was going to assume silence as an agreement. If there's any objections, feel free to speak up.
Yeah, no, I think discussions have been net useful on Gateway API where I've had experience with them. I don't know about any others. They can be a little confusing as a heads up, because it's, they kind of fall off the top. Issues will eventually get closed if there's no activity. Discussions, not so much. But yeah, discussions are still useful. May help to provide some guidelines in our docs or somewhere of when to use a discussion versus start an issue.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Sweet. And then this, I think my next topic, I can work with Abdullah's. Just chatting with Shane a little bit. Yeah, I see that Shane's on here. We're kind of discussing when we should start the generalization effort of the gateway to extension protocol. Abdullah sketches some of that out. So happy to jump into this, Abdullah. If you want to hop in, I can give you co-host, and you can share this doc again. We talked some last week.
Feel free to share it. Sure. Open it.
This feels like something that could take a non-trivial amount of time. Just real quick, where are we on 1.0 or 0.1? Sorry, not 1.0 for release. What is there anything we need to discuss on this call before we get that release out?
Do you want to share the tracking issue?
Yeah. Let me pull that up. Thank you for pinning it. Yeah. So it looks like we added this separation. I'm filling out the website content. I'm working on that now. It looks like Danian is setting up the end-to-end test. He had a PR cut. I think it was this morning. So those are kind of the only things. We have one more PR for the API review, but Abdullah took a pass last night, and there were just some small grammatical fixes. But other than these things, I think we should be good to go.
Okay, so we can aim for sometime next week then to get a release out.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks. Yeah, great to bring up. But jumping back into Gateway Inference extension, Abdullah, I'll let you explain this.
Yeah, so in this document, I'm trying to get consensus on what we're trying to standardize. And I put some thoughts into this document. So the yellow boxes are the things that you would usually have in like a typical gateway setup, right? Like you have a gateway controller, whether it's Envoy, you use HTTP routes and like gateway API to create a load balancer, and gateway controller will react to it to actually create the proxy, and then you have the traffic flowing from the client to the model servers. So we've introduced two new APIs, the Inference Pool API, the Inference Model API, and we're also introducing a reference implementation for what we call like an endpoint picker. And that adds like a bunch of things that we want to standardize or talk about standardizing. I'm trying to categorize them into two categories. One is the object APIs, which is the inference pool and inference model API. And the other one is how do we standardize the interaction between the proxy and the model servers with the extension. And in this context, we will have an extension protocol. Right now in our implementation, we're using XProc, and then the model server protocol, which we have a proposal for, and it usually tries to basically define what metrics the model server should expose for the endpoint picker to scrape and make decisions on, like basically trying to understand the load of the model server. And I also added observability, quote unquote, protocol. If we want to standardize like the set of metrics that we would like the inference extension or a compatible one to expose. So that's another thing that we could consider making it as a standard. My proposal is to split this into two standards. One is the object APIs, the inference model and inference pool. That's one, and then another contract which is standardizes the extension protocol, then the model server protocol, and potentially the observability protocol. So any, for example, like an implementation of the endpoint picker that is not necessarily like the one that we have in open source that would like to basically be integrated, they would implement these protocols, or if they want to fork it, they have to continue to support the extension protocol like the XProc and the model server protocol. So that's the idea here. Any thoughts or ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased here, but I feel like this is really the heart of the project itself, right? I hope that if this project is successful, it will be not because of, any one part of it, but just the framework that we're building, the protocols, the interfaces, et cetera, that we're building that to enable, multiple gateways, multiple, endpoint picker, endpoint selection, extensions, just, for everything to be really pluggable here, because I don't think any one solution is going to work for everyone. So yeah, I mean, I think this diagram is awesome. And I looked at the doc a bit before this meeting, and I think it's, on point. So yeah, I just agree with what you're saying. Don't have any meaningful changes to suggest here.
So one question I have is scope. What defines an extension? Because what we're doing now is essentially a load balancer. So should we make it so that even standard load balancers now conform to this extension protocol? Is this expected to be kind of special case things only? I think defining the scope early will help us from letting it creep out too big, or maybe we want it big. But that is one question I have.
And what that API surface ultimately looks like in Gateway API, because there's been a long history of wanting to have the ability to kind of define what the load balancing strategy is going to be for a route.
Yeah, no, I completely echo that. I want to hopefully take a lot of these concepts and up level them to be something that's more generic in Gateway API in the future. But I'm hoping this particularly can be a good starting point, a good, way to experiment with inference focused extension, since I think there's some additional API surface that is inference focused here. But yeah, I think we need to take this not just here, but also to Gateway API. But hopefully this is an easier starting point.
Yeah. When you do that, I don't know yet, but I do think that because there's been so much interest, I can think of 3 issues that have been opened off the top of my head. One was from me in like 2020 or something, and then one was from Arco and so forth. I think you'll be able to leverage the community to get some help. I think it might actually increase velocity, not slow us down to go work with upstream if we just get the right people in play.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
I agree as well. Because one problem I see with keeping this together is we'll start to have two camps, people that are very gateway focused and people that are very inference focused. And as we go, I think their overlap might get smaller, which is what this protocol is trying to do. So I think taking this to gateway earlier is probably fair.
I think we're like, there are two different things here. One is the load balancing concept, right? Like, is it something that we want to standardize in Gateway API? The other one is what Rob and others are proposing here is a standard for extensions, right? This is defining the standard for extensions, not necessarily for load balancing. And we are sidestepping the load balancing standardization by saying it's an implementation of the endpoint of the extension, right? What we're trying to define here is not load balancing, is the extension mechanism. And we are intentionally not speccing in the inference pool and inference model API, like load balancing, too much load balancing, standard. The only thing we have right now is criticality, probably for serving objective. But other than that, like, for example, the algorithm we have in the endpoint picker for example, saying, okay, we're going to send the request to the server with the lowest, with the shortest queue, and then the smallest KV cache utilization, and we do other things like prefix cache based affinity and LoRa affinity. All of these things are implementation of the endpoint picker. They are not specced in the APIs as of now, and that what gives us this flexibility in the future to potentially up-level this into the gateway API without really depending on that right now. At least that's the way that I'm thinking about it. Rob, maybe, like, I don't know, is that matches, or Shane, you matches what you have in mind as well, like for the concept of extensions as well.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly it, right? One of the things that scared us away in Gateway API is, or at least me away, was the idea that an extension mechanism is so open-ended, and it's really difficult to build without also having some kind of reference extension to build it with, right? And so this project is nice in that it will allow us to do end-to-end tests that include a reference extension as well. And I hope, in a very clear use case for that extension. And I hope we can take these patterns and pick them up and make them more generic in Gateway API in the future.
Yeah, I think where we last left off, if I'm not misremembering, with Gateway API was we talked about having a load balancer strategy field that was just a implementation specific string.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Tell us what your load balancing strategy is called, and then your implementation can just know that and do what it will.
Yeah, and I know there have been some, like, Nick right now is pushing for external auth, and that's, in the same ballpark as this, but a little bit different. And so I can imagine just external processing in general. There's been some discussion, maybe mostly from Istio folks, of like, WASM, or so maybe some kind of external processing altogether. But all of those didn't have quite as clear a use case as this right now. So hopefully we can use this to drive things further.
Yeah. I just don't know what, we say we're not focusing on load balancing. That's fair. I just don't know what extension means. And having dealt with this, which was pretty inference focused, we still found that we were iterating on the API quite a bit. And our scope, I felt, was well defined. But when we say extension, we could mean anything, and we sure can't say it doesn't mean load balancing, because our reference, while our API does not surface much, agreed, it is still doing load balancing. So I think defining the extension box might be a really good step so that we can actually iterate on a protocol. Or we could just say that V1 is XProc. that might feel like a cop out, and that might not work for all gateways. So I don't think that works, but just throwing out an idea.
No, I mean, I think some, maybe it's even a subset of XProc. I'm not really sure. I think the things I've seen floated around, I think there's an issue right now that I either started. There's some discussion around the idea of just having, a standard header that is responded, that is part of a response to, say this is the endpoint to select. So, I mean, something like as simple as that, I mean, that really glosses over the amount that we need in this. But I guess what I'm saying is we may not need everything that XProc offers.
Cool.
Okay. I'm probably going to try and put this diagram in our docs and try to distinguish between these two API contracts, just to clarify. Like, if you have our endpoint, like the reference implementation, what is it required for a gateway to integrate with it, and for a model server to be supported? So that will help at least clarify, how to use the endpoint picker moving forward, or the extension mechanism in general. One question here is, in our release, do we want to continue to release the whole thing that we have, the reference implementation and the model and the APIs, or only the APIs?
I know it's a real pain to try and bundle things together, but I feel like at least in the early days, if we split our efforts too broadly across too many repos, it's going to be more confusing. So maybe at least until. Yeah.
I think to get the best benefit of the reference implementation, you do kind of want to tether it to the version it was referencing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think the smallest activation energy possible is in our benefit for now. Cool. Did we have any? It sounds like we're pretty good here. Any other questions, or we can move on? Okay. Cool. Song, you have the model server protocol proposal that unfortunately has been sitting for a while. Apologies. Please.
Share it?
Yeah, I'll share it. Do you want me to go to file itself?
Yeah, maybe I will just give a high-level overview of this. And so we previously had a doc on this. Very early in this project, and didn't get much attraction. There are some conversation there, but didn't get much attention. So this time I'm putting it together as a PI in this proposal. Hopefully get more attention, and also cut the scope. Initially we thought about a lot of things, what we may need in the future. So this one is really what we need like now, and so it's very small. So basically it talks about what kind of metrics we need from the model server in the current extension implementation. Thanks. And and also a few other kind of metadata kind of reporting things there. For example, model server should report whether you support LoRa adapters. If you support LoRa adapter, you should report this kind of LoRa related metrics, and if not, you don't need to. So I think one of the things I want to get the feedback from the community is, right now, because we are in the early stage, right? So there's a lot of unknowns, ambiguity. So the way I'm putting this together now is I try to clarify what is the requirement, like must have or nice to have. So the requirement is really kind of conceptually what kind of information we need from the model servers. For example, the KV cache utilization. So the model server must have this information in order to leverage the algorithms in this extension. But we are not trying to define exactly, what is the metric format? Is that Prometheus? Is something else, or what exactly that API look like? We're now trying to enforce that at this point. So I want to get some feedback on this in general. And the reason is, I think it's twofold. Sorry, let me finish, then I'll take questions. One is some of the information we need already established by model server. For example, metrics, they already have a name there. If we want to have the same name or same format, it's gonna disrupt a lot of the existing, existing API. And the other aspect is for things like LoRa. It's very new. It's kind of hard to suggest a protocol that works for every model server. So it's a little premature for that. So that's why I'm hesitant of enforcing some of this. So yeah, feel free to tell me.
We had Abdullah, Rob, myself.
So I think we want to scope this, since this is the protocol for the reference implementation. If the reference implementation is using Prometheus, we need to make that part of the spec. That it needs to be because that's what the reference implementation will be trying to do, right? It will be expecting a Prometheus endpoint, and so we need to have that part of the spec. That's my intuition here, with regards to the metrics specifically. The other ones, I think, for example, LoRa, those are not necessarily part of the reference implementation. So I think those, at least at this point, should not be part of the spec. It's part of the orchestration that we wanted to have to manage LoRa adapters, but it's not a core requirement for the endpoint picker implementation, right? It doesn't. Its behavior doesn't require that.
It does. So the reference implementation today does assume, the LoRa affinity algorithm does assume certain behavior from model server. So
right, but not the loading and unloading API.
No, not that part. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so that's the. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I have that. If I did, maybe I just mentioned that. But I can get rid of that if I have that. Yeah.
Rob, go ahead. I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things, I guess I got a couple questions. It seems like anything like this needs to be versioned. Is this something that we want to be considered an artifact of our release, right? So that this is part of the, maybe not 0.1 release, but 0.2 or some kind of release, and any modifications are part of the broader release of the project. Yeah, I'll start with that question, and I've got a follow up after.
Yeah, I agree with distributed version. Yeah.
Yeah, this one, and the fact that we are saying the xproc is the protocol for the extension. Both of them are going to be, and that goes back to the discussion we had earlier, right? That endpoint picker reference implementation contract. This whole thing needs to have a version, and under that is going to be the model server protocol and the extension protocol.
Yeah.
And this one is extremely important because model server changes so much. Like there's a new feature, for example, prefix caching, and then maybe 0.2 will include that. And right now it
makes sense. One of the things that I am really interested in making sure we can make realistic and viable here is the idea that anyone else can build a extension that plugs into this ecosystem and have some guarantees. So that's kind of the level above it, as Abdullah's doc showed, between gateway and extension, and then the level below it, between extension and model server. And this is that. But what I see in here a lot is this kind of RFC language that a lot of shoulds and mays and not many musts. I don't know if I see any musts. And so it feels like it's looser than we really than we can safely build anything around as an extension. If you don't have confidence that a model server is providing these things, then it's more just a bunch of nice to haves in a list, but not really something you can confidently build against. Where what I would love to get to is a place where we could call a model server conformant or something, right? So for example, VLM or whatever, they meet this set of criteria, and anyone developing an extension can be confident that they're going to have all this information. And VLM or whatever extension can have a little like badge or something like that shows that they're a conformant part of this ecosystem. I don't know. That would be like the direction I'd like to get to. I'm not saying it needs to be solved in this specific PR, but yeah.
Thanks for feedback. That's exactly one of the key feedback I want to get from the community. So just to clarify, I think there are not a lot of must, but I think there are a couple at least. So it talks more in the must have, we're not like what information or kind of behavior you must have, but not in the must not in the category of that specific language, like what is the format, the API, exact API, and to have that conformance stamp, like you said. I love to get that. I agree. So as a matter of fact, right now we are basically creating some curated code for different model servers right now, basically. And I'd love to get to that point, like having that conformance stamp and have automatically,
Sorry, go ahead, Song.
Yeah, I think, that's my point. I just want to hear, I think we can take two approaches. One is the proposal today that, we will, as we pick which model server to integrate, we have to write some code to adapt to that. And this allows us to move fast. And the other way is we could just establish that now, and then go ahead to the model server community and implement that conformance kind of protocol. That will, I guess, will take more time. So maybe some sort of hybrid approach will make sense here.
Yeah, and echoing what Rob said, I actually really like this proposal, except for the shoulds, maybes, probablys. If we're gonna call something a protocol, I think we need like, I don't know, I'm just finger in the wind, 10 to 20% optionals. I think a lot of these need to be like, you have to have this, because right now we're only saying they must implement OpenAI API spec, and that's an open API spec, not ours. And we're not saying that your model server can't exist if you don't do this. We're just saying that if they don't do this, it's not going to work with the inference extension. So I think we can be pretty strongly worded. And if we do need to make efforts to integrate some of that, I'm happy to do it. DLLM, I think, is a great place. I'm glad we started with that model server. So I think getting that nailed down with one reference implementation, which I think we want to do with Gateway as well. We talked about doing that. I think nailing that down and showing that, hey, this model server fulfills this protocol, and it is not tied to that model server. It just exists, and we just need these pipes to guarantee that something's coming through. I think that's great for a V1. We'll probably get it wrong, but I do think we want to be strongly worded. So, like Rob said, people can rely on what's coming in, and they can write their own extension. That's the only thing I think. Other than that, I actually really like what we have.
So for a V1 release, I think we need to just mention that exactly what we need right now, no future or speculative or whatever. Like we're going to release pretty much like what you have at the top, right? Like these two metrics and the OpenAI protocol. That's it. That's what we're going to have as a V1 and make it part of. And then we can also add to it on the side the protocol for the extension, and those two are bundled as V1 for the reference implementation first release with the APIs that we're going to release as well. Just mentioning this as like preparing for the next release we're aiming for next week. So I'll work with you, Chong, on the PR. I'll add some comments. Maybe we can. I don't know how we want to release them, but maybe like, do we want like a special directory to put these standards in and version them, like V1, like a inference endpoint picker contract, and then under that we have V1, V2, V3. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. Maybe Rob has some experience here. My understanding, we are just shipping everything protocols and the reference implementation as a monolith release.
Sure. But we want to have track of history as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think monolith release combined with changelog is probably about as good as we can do right now, and then we can, in our documentation, for the sake of completeness, we could store v0.1, v0.2, etc. in completion, or have references to the complete released contract, or what protocol I guess we're calling it, in our docs. But I think a changelog and just keeping the main branch as close to our current state as possible seems reasonable.
Okay, I'll take AI to clean this up and remove some of the future work and just see what this release needs. I think one question is about this LoRa metric. I think Kellen mentioned something there. Yeah, I think for the two metrics, the KV cache and the other, we can change. If not must right now, we can change that to must. I don't see any risk there, because most servers do have that metric and they do speak Prometheus, at least the ones that we are looking, the popular ones we are looking at. So I'm not seeing any risk. The LoRa one, I'm considering putting it as something like experimental kind of wording there. It's not like protocol, because I don't see this, VLM or cross VLM or TGI or LoRaX, they got implemented the same way and they export the same metrics. Right now, they are not. So I'm not.
Yeah, and that's true. But part of our effort is to operationalize some of these developing tools. I actually did a deep dive on LoRa just to kind of get a general temperature check of what the research has been looking like lately, as well as what the community generally thinks about it. I see positive things. There's critiques, as everything does, but I'll have a write-up on that hopefully next week. But anyways, I think part of what we're doing should be to kind of pave some of the path, like with VLLM, and hopefully with some of the other model servers, we can set a standard. I think that should be one of our primary goals. I think LoRa is incredibly powerful. It is like the only actual fine tune. RAG is not not really a fine tune because it injects prompts, but it's the only fine tune that you can share a base model on, and that is really powerful. So I think we should leverage that, and that should kind of be one of our champion banners, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll be careful if we try to. I guess it's hard to set a standard for us, but yeah, we do need more engagement with those communities and try to drive a standard. But yeah, I just feel at this moment, it's still a little premature to have that standard.
Cool.
But yeah, looking forward to your write-up, Kellen, and hopefully we can drive something there.
Cool. Sounds good. That's all our agenda items. Does anyone have anything else? Leave the floor open. Cool. Everyone gets a little bit of time back. 20 minutes. Thank you so much. See you guys.
Thanks.